Ivan Konev, a peasant's son from the Vologda province who became one of the greatest commanders of World War II. A man whose tank armies marched from the Kursk bulge to Prague, crushing everything in their path. A military leader whose rivalry with Zhukov for the right to take Berlin determined the outcome of the war in Europe. How did a simple lumberjack become a marshal commanding millions of soldiers? What trials did he go through on his way to glory? Why was he called the master of tank operations? And is it fair that the laurels for taking Berlin went not to him, but to his rival? The story of Marshal Konev is a story about how true commanders are born from God. If you like this story about the great commander, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like it. Here you will find many other documentary stories about heroes and events that changed the course of history. And now I invite you to discuss in the comments. Do you think Stalin's decision to give credit for the capture of Berlin to Zhukov and not to Konev, whose troops were the first to reach the southern outskirts of the German capital, was fair? Share your opinion. On December 28, 1897, a boy named Vanya was born in the small village of Lodeno in the Nikolsky district of the Vologda province. The Konev family belonged to the numerous peasant class that formed the basis of the Russian Empire. His father, Stepan Ivanovich Konev, was an ordinary peasant, and his mother, Evdokia Stepanovna, ran the household and raised the children. The family's life flowed steadily, following the rhythm of peasant labor, plowing, sowing, harvesting, and gathering firewood for the winter. The village of Lodeno was neither large nor wealthy, a few dozen houses, a church, and a local school. That was the whole world in which the future marshal grew up. The Vologda region was famous for its harsh climate and hard-working population. There were no landowners here. The peasants owned their own plots of land and lived off their own labor. This independence and self-reliance would become important traits in Ivan Konev's personality. The boy's childhood was short and difficult. When Vanya was only a few years old, his mother died. The loss of his mother at such an early age was the first serious test in the life of the future commander. His father had to raise his children alone, combining their upbringing with hard peasant work. From the age of 6, Ivan already helped around the farm. He fed the poultry, looked after his younger siblings, and carried water from the well. Despite the difficulties, his father insisted that his son receive an education. Vanya enrolled in a local school where he learned to read, write, arithmetic, and the law of God. Studying came easily to the boy. He had a sharp memory and natural intelligence. His teachers noted his diligence and curiosity. Ivan especially liked history lessons, where they talked about the glorious victories of Russian arms, about Suvorov and Kutuzov. But peasant life did not allow him to sit at his books for long. As soon as Ivan graduated from the local school, he had to start working full-time. The teenager worked alongside adults, plowing, mowing, and gathering firewood. The forests of Vologda provided peasants with additional income. In winter, the men cut down trees, and in spring, they floated them down the rivers. This work required extraordinary strength and endurance. At the age of 16, Ivan Konev made a decision that changed his destiny. With a caravan of rafts and a birch bark box on his shoulders containing a spare shirt, a spoon, and a knife, he set off for Arkhangelsk. His uncle Dmitry worked there as a loader in the port. The young man hoped to find a better life in the city than the one that awaited him in the village. The journey along the northern rivers took more than a week. Arkhangelsk greeted the provincial boy with the noise and bustle of a large port city. Uncle Dmitry took in his nephew, even though he himself did not live well. He helped Ivan get a job as a laborer at Amasov's forest exchange, and then as a timekeeper at the pier. The work was hard. He had to get up before dawn and work until dark. But Konev did not complain. He was used to hard work from childhood. The city opened up a new world for the young man. Here he could get books that he would never see in the village. Ivan read everything he could get his hands on and was especially fascinated by history. He was enthralled by stories about Spartacus's uprising and the slaves' struggle against the Roman legions. These books awakened in the young man a sense of justice and a desire for a better life. Was a simple peasant boy really destined to spend his whole life working for others? Working in the port, Konev saw how rich merchants and shipowners lived and understood the gulf between them and ordinary workers. In Arkhangelsk, the beginning of the 20th century was a time of growth for the labor movement. Young Konev heard talk of strikes, of the injustice of the existing system, of the need for change. These ideas resonated with the young man, who had been raised in a life of labor and deprivation. After a year of working in Arkhangelsk, Ivan returned to his native land. He resumed his work in logging and timber rafting. But something had changed in him. The city had given him an understanding that life could be different. His experience working in the port, communicating with city workers, and reading books all shaped the worldview of the future commander. Konev remained connected to the people from whom he came, but he already understood that his path must be different. During those years, Russia was on the verge of tremendous change. The revolution of 1905 shook the country, but its echoes were faint in the provinces. Life in the Vologda province went on as usual. Ivan Konev continued to work in logging, but was already preparing himself for a different destiny. A difficult childhood, the early loss of his mother, and peasant labor tempered the young man's character. He learned patience, perseverance, and the ability to overcome difficulties. Konev never forgot his peasant roots. Even after becoming a marshal, he remained approachable, cared for his soldiers, and understood the needs of ordinary people. The Vologda region gave him strength of character, endurance, and the folk wisdom that would help him command millions of people in the future. But at that time, 18-year-old Ivan Konev had no idea that fate had prepared a path for him as a military leader. The year 1914 was approaching, and the world was on the brink of a great war. The Russian Empire was preparing for trials that would turn the lives of millions of people upside down. Among these millions would be a simple boy from Vologda named Ivan Konev. What events awaited him? How would a peasant's son become one of the greatest military leaders of the 20th century? World War I broke out, and the Russian Empire called millions of its sons to arms. 17-year-old Ivan Konev was drafted into the army in the spring of 1915. The young recruit went to the front as a private, like millions of other peasant boys. The war became a school of courage for him, and his first introduction to military affairs. Konev fought as an artilleryman, learning the basics of military science in the trenches and at firing positions. Life in the trenches was hard. Mud, cold, constant danger, artillery shelling, gas attacks. All this tempered the young soldier's character. Ivan Konev proved himself to be a brave and disciplined soldier. He was noticed by his commanders, and soon the private was promoted to non-commissioned officer. His ability to quickly orient himself in combat situations and his skill in leading people were already evident at that time. But the main discovery of the war for Konev was the realization of the senselessness of this slaughter. The revolution of 1917 found Konev at the front. The Tsarist army was falling apart before his eyes. Soldiers no longer wanted to fight for goals they did not understand. There were heated discussions in the trenches about the future of Russia. Ivan Konev listened attentively to the agitators, read leaflets, and pondered the fate of the country. When the Bolsheviks came to power, he did not hesitate. The revolution promised land to the peasants and peace to the peoples. In 1918, Konev joined the Red Army. The Civil War required decisive and dedicated people. 20-year-old Ivan Konev became a military commissar. This position required not only courage, but also the ability to work with people, raise morale, and instill consciousness. The commissar had to be both a political worker and a warrior, ready to be the first to go into battle. The Civil War swept across Russia like a bloody whirlwind. Konev fought on various fronts, against the White Army, against the interventionists, and against numerous rebel groups. He participated in battles on the Eastern Front against Admiral Kolchak's troops. The Red Army units in which Konev served fought with desperate bravery. The young commissar proved himself to be a fearless warrior and a talented agitator. The work of a military commissar was deadly dangerous. If the Whites captured commissars, they usually shot them on the spot. Konev found himself on the brink of death more than once, but fate spared the future marshal. In battle, he gained his first invaluable experience of command. He had to not only inspire the soldiers with speeches, but also make tactical decisions, organize defenses, and plan attacks. The Red Army of those years was a revolutionary army, but extremely disorganized. There was a shortage of trained commanders, discipline was often lacking, and supplies were poorly organized. Ivan Konev saw all these problems from the inside and understood the need to create a regular, professional army. The experience of the Civil War showed him the importance of clear organization, strict discipline, and competent command. By the end of the Civil War, Konev was already commanding a regiment. He had gone from being a political worker to a commander. This was rare. Many commissars remained in political work, but Konev showed his abilities as a military leader. He learned on the job, absorbed the experience of older military specialists who had served in the Red Army, and read extensively on military affairs. Self-education became an important part of his life. After the end of the Civil War, the country faced the task of creating a regular army. It needed educated commanders who knew not only revolutionary enthusiasm, but also military science. In 1921, Konev enrolled in the higher military academic courses. Studying was not easy. He lacked a basic education and had to make up for lost time. But perseverance and determination helped him overcome the difficulties. A peasant's son who had not received a systematic education in childhood, he stubbornly studied military science. Konev studied tactics, strategy, military history, and military geography. He was particularly fascinated by Napoleon's campaigns and the Russo-Japanese War. Analyzing the mistakes and victories of the past shaped the thinking of the future commander. He understood that modern warfare required in-depth knowledge and constant improvement. After completing his studies in 1926, Konev was appointed regimental commander. This was an important stage in his career. A regiment is a serious military unit that requires a commander to have versatile knowledge and organizational skills. Konev threw himself into his work, striving to make his regiment exemplary. He demanded strict discipline, intensive training, and constant combat readiness. The interwar years were a time of building a new army. The Red Army was learning from the experience of the World War, studying the theories of deep operations, mechanization of troops, and interaction between branches of the military. Konev closely followed developments in military thought, read the works of Tukhachevsky and Triandafilov, and participated in maneuvers and exercises. He grew as a military leader, gradually rising through the ranks. Ivan Konev's revolutionary path shaped him as a commander of a new formation. He was not a career officer of the old army, nor did he study at military academies of the Russian Empire. Konev was a product of the revolution, a man who rose from the bottom, who went from soldier to commander through the crucible of the Civil War. This school gave him an understanding of soldier psychology, the ability to work with people, and revolutionary dedication to the cause. But at the same time, Konev was not a fanatic blinded by ideology. He understood the importance of professionalism, military science, and systematic knowledge. The combination of revolutionary enthusiasm and a desire for professional growth distinguished him from many of his contemporaries. He rose from a private soldier in World War I to a Red Army regiment commander in 10 years. New challenges and new heights awaited him ahead. What role would this experience play in the coming battles of the Great Patriotic War? The 1930s were a time of rapid advancement in Ivan Konev's military career. In 1929, he was appointed division commander. jumping from regimental to divisional level. The division numbered several thousand men and included infantry regiments, artillery, and technical units. Commanding such a formation required broad vision and organizational talent. Konev coped with the task, and his division was considered one of the best in the district. During those years, the Red Army was undergoing a period of intensive modernization. Tank units and mechanized corps appeared, and military aviation developed. Konev carefully studied new types of weapons and was particularly interested in the use of tanks. The theory of deep operations, developed by Soviet military theorists, involved the massive use of tanks to break through defenses and build on success. These ideas made a deep impression on Konev. In 1932, Konev joined the Communist Party. It was a conscious political choice. Party membership opened the way to higher positions, but also imposed additional obligations. Konev was never a careerist, in the worst sense of the word. But he understood that without a party card, the path to the top was closed. At the same time, he sincerely believed in the ideals for which he had fought in the Civil War. The years of the Great Terror were a terrible ordeal for the Red Army's command staff. In 1937-1938, tens of thousands of officers, including the most prominent military leaders, were repressed. Tukhachevsky, Yakir, Uborovich, and many other talented commanders were arrested and shot. The army was decapitated, and the command structure was demoralized. Anyone could be the next to come under suspicion. Ivan Konev was lucky. He was not subjected to repression. Moreover, in the context of mass purges, his career took off. Vacancies in senior command positions became available, and Konev was appointed Corps Commander. A corps is a large operational unit capable of independently solving serious combat tasks. Konev quickly settled into his new position, demonstrating his organizational skills. In 1938, Konev graduated from the Frunze Military Academy, the country's highest military educational institution. His studies at the academy gave him systematic knowledge of operational art, strategy, and military history. Konev did not just receive a diploma, he deeply mastered the theory of modern warfare. His thesis was devoted to issues of offensive operations with the breakthrough of fortified lines. After the academy, he was appointed commander of the Trans-Baikal Military District. It was a responsible position. The district bordered Mongolia and Manchukuo, where Japanese troops were stationed. Relations with Japan were tense, and military provocations occurred regularly. Konev was engaged in strengthening border defenses, increasing the combat readiness of troops, and organizing reconnaissance. In the summer of 1939, a conflict broke out on the Khalkhin-Gol River. Japanese troops attempted to seize part of Mongolian territory. The USSR, bound by a treaty with Mongolia, sent troops there. The group was commanded by Commodore Zhukov, who inflicted a crushing defeat on the Japanese. Konev carefully studied the experience of these battles, especially the use of tank units to encircle the enemy. Khalkhin-Gol demonstrated the effectiveness of a massive strike by mechanized units. In 1940, Konev received another promotion. He was appointed commander of the North Caucasus Military District. This was a prestigious position in one of the largest military districts in the country. Konev moved to Rostov-on-Don and energetically set about strengthening the troops. He conducted exercises, inspected units, demanded strict discipline and high combat readiness. The commander understood that war with Germany was inevitable. Events in Europe were developing rapidly. Germany defeated Poland and France and captured almost all of Western Europe. The Wehrmacht was considered an invincible army. The Soviet Union was feverishly preparing for war, but time had been lost. Repressions had decapitated the army, and new personnel had not had time to gain sufficient experience. Konev, like many commanders, was well aware of the weaknesses of the Red Army, but he tried to do everything possible to prepare the troops. In June 1941, Konev was promoted to lieutenant general. This was recognition of his merits and abilities. The 43-year-old general was in his prime and full of energy. He had extensive experience in commanding units ranging from regiments to military districts, theoretical training at the academy, and an understanding of modern military art. His career seemed to be going brilliantly, but a terrible ordeal lay ahead, for which no one was prepared. The commander's formation took place under the most difficult conditions. Konev grew up with the Red Army, studied with it, and improved with it, from commissar in the Civil War to district commander. This path required not only ability, but also the ability to adapt, survive repression, and constantly prove his loyalty. At the same time, Konev did not become a soulless functionary. He retained his desire for professionalism. The pre-war years shaped Konev as an operational-level commander. He learned to command large units, plan operations, and organize the interaction of different branches of the military. He paid particular attention to tank forces, seeing them as the main striking force of modern warfare. This knowledge and these skills would come in handy in the future, when Konev became a recognized master of tank operations. But first, he had to go through the bitterness of defeat. Was General Konev ready for the test of a great war? On June 22, 1941, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the German army launched a monstrous attack on the Soviet Union. The Great Patriotic War had begun. Lieutenant General Ivan Konev was at the disposal of the General Staff at that moment. He was urgently summoned to Moscow and appointed commander of the 19th Army, which was being formed in the North Caucasus. The task was clear: to form an army as quickly as possible and send it to the front. The 19th Army was created literally from scratch. Reservists were called up, organized into divisions, armed and equipped. There was a shortage of everything: rifles, machine guns, artillery, vehicles, and communications equipment. Many soldiers had no combat experience at all. Konev understood that he was sending insufficiently trained troops to the front, but he had no choice. The situation at the front was catastrophic. The Germans were advancing on Moscow, and the Soviet armies were suffering defeat after defeat. By mid-July, Konev's army had taken up positions in the Vitebsk area. The situation there was critical. The German Army Group Center had broken through the defenses, surrounded large Red Army forces near Minsk, and was advancing in the Smolensk direction. The 19th Army had to stop the enemy and cover the road to Moscow. The task seemed impossible. The Germans had overwhelming superiority in experience, organization, aviation, and tanks. Konev tried to organize the defense, but faced a host of problems. Communications were poor. Intelligence could not determine the direction of the enemy's main attack, and the troops had no experience in modern combat. German aircraft dominated the skies, methodically bombing positions, communication centers, and rear areas. German tank wedges broke through the defenses, entered the rear, and surrounded units. The soldiers fought bravely, but they lacked experience and organization. At the end of July, the 19th Army was surrounded in the Vitebsk area. Konev tried to organize a breakthrough, but the ring was tightening. The Germans methodically tightened the encirclement, cut off retreat routes, and destroyed attempts to break out. The losses were enormous. Thousands of soldiers were killed, captured, or went missing. Konev and the remnants of his staff managed to break out of the encirclement, but the army had effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. This failure was a heavy blow for Konev. His first experience of command in a major war had ended in disaster. He understood that he had failed in his task, although objective circumstances made success almost impossible. But in the Red Army of 1941, defeat was dealt with severely. Many commanders who had suffered failure were court-martialed. Konev awaited punishment. However, fate decided otherwise. In August 1941, Konev was not shot, but appointed deputy commander of the Western Front. This was unusual. After such a failure, demotion or arrest usually followed. But command personnel were dwindling at an alarming rate, and there was a catastrophic shortage of experienced generals. The High Command decided to give Konev a second chance. Perhaps the intercession of someone in the top leadership also played a role. In September 1941, the Western Front was under the command of General Konev, who was appointed commander after Timoshenko was removed. It was an unexpected promotion, from deputy to front commander. The situation at the front was extremely difficult. The Germans were preparing a general offensive on Moscow, Operation Typhoon. The Soviet command was expecting an attack, but underestimated its scale and direction. On September 30th, 1941, Operation Typhoon began. German tank wedges broke through the defenses of the Western and Bryansk fronts. Konev tried to organize resistance, but the Germans acted with lightning speed. By October 7, the troops of the Western Front were surrounded in the Vyazma area. Several pockets were formed, trapping more than 600,000 Soviet soldiers and officers. The Vyazma disaster became one of the most terrible defeats of the Red Army. The surrounded troops fought desperately, trying to break through, but their chances were slim. The Germans methodically eliminated the pockets. Konev was in one of the surrounded armies, leading the attempts to break through. The situation was hopeless. Ammunition and food were running out, and communication with the High Command had been lost. It seemed that the front commander was facing capture or death. In this critical situation, a group led by General Zhukov, who had just been appointed commander of the Western Front in place of Konev, broke through to the encircled troops. Zhukov organized a corridor through which the remnants of the troops, including Konev and his staff, were able to escape. The rescue was a miracle. Most of those who were surrounded were killed or taken prisoner. Konev owed his life to Zhukov and would never forget it. After the Vyazma disaster, Konev's fate hung in the balance. According to the laws of wartime, he should have been shot. The encirclement and defeat of an entire front was a death sentence. But Zhukov interceded for Konev before Stalin. Zhukov said that Konev was a capable commander, that objective circumstances were to blame for the defeat, and that such generals could not be shot at this time. Stalin agreed to give Konev another chance. The trial by fire turned out to be a disaster for Konev. 2 major defeats in 3 months of war was a terrible record. Many did not survive such disgrace, committing suicide or breaking down psychologically. But Konev endured. He learned from his failures, understood his mistakes, and realized that the Wehrmacht was not a training opponent, that modern warfare required a completely different level of training and thinking. These bitter lessons would become the foundation for future victories. Would Konev be able to prove himself worthy of trust? October 1941 became a turning point in the fate of Ivan Konev. After the Vyazemsk catastrophe, he was appointed commander of the Kalinin Front, which was just being created to defend the northern approaches to Moscow. The Germans captured the city of Kalinin and pushed on, trying to bypass Moscow from the north. Konev's task was to stop the enemy, prevent them from developing their offensive, and, if possible, launch a counteroffensive. The Kalinin Front was hastily formed from reserve divisions, militias, cadet regiments, and the remnants of defeated units. Konev received a motley crew of troops, poorly armed and insufficiently trained. But there was no choice. Every day of delay could cost Moscow its fall. The general understood the enormous responsibility. This was his third and last chance. Another defeat, and there would be no mercy. Zhukov, who had saved Konev from execution, believed in his abilities. A complex relationship developed between the two generals. On the one hand, Konev was grateful to Zhukov for saving his life. On the other hand, this gratitude weighed heavily on him, creating a sense of duty and dependence. Konev was a proud man, and he did not like being in a position of obligation. But he understood that he had to justify the trust placed in him. The confrontation near Kalinin unfolded in late October and early November 1941. German troops attempted to break through to Torzhok, bypassing Moscow from the north. Konev organized a strong defense. His troops secured their positions, repelled attacks, and wore down the enemy. For the first time since the beginning of the war, Konev was able to organize a stable defense that the Germans were unable to break through on the move. The November battles near Kalinin showed that the Red Army was learning to fight. The soldiers fought with desperate bravery. The commanders acted more competently, and the organization of the defense improved. Konev led the troops firmly and confidently. He personally went to the front lines, encouraged the soldiers, and monitored the execution of orders. The Germans suffered heavy losses, but were unable to break through the defenses. On December 5, 1941, Soviet troops launched a counter-offensive near Moscow. Zhukov's troops went on the offensive south and west of the capital. Konev's Kalinin front was tasked with striking from the north, liberating Kalinin, and advancing westward. This was the moment of truth for Konev, his first offensive operation, his first chance to get revenge for his defeats. Konev carefully prepared the offensive. He concentrated his artillery on the main strike direction, brought up reserves, and organized reconnaissance. On the morning of December 16th, the troops of the Kalinin front went on the offensive. The attack came as a surprise to the Germans, who did not expect the seemingly depleted Red Army to be capable of an offensive. Soviet troops broke through the defenses and rushed forward. The battles for the liberation of Kalinin were fierce. The Germans clung to every house, every street. But the Soviet troops pressed on with relentless force. On December 16, 1941, Kalinin was liberated. This was Konev's first major victory, the first large city liberated by the troops under his command. The news of the capture of Kalinin raised the morale of the entire Red Army. The troops of the Kalinin front continued their offensive. In December and January, they advanced 100 to 150 kilometers to the west, liberated dozens of settlements, and inflicted serious damage on the Germans. Konev proved himself to be a capable offensive commander. He skillfully maneuvered his forces, striking at the enemy's weak points and preventing the Germans from gaining a foothold on new fronts. The Battle of Moscow was a triumph for Konev. He proved that he was capable not only of defending, but also of attacking. The troops of the Kalinin front made a significant contribution to the defeat of the Germans near Moscow. Konev received thanks from the High Command for his skillful leadership of the troops. Zhukov was pleased with the actions of his subordinate. Saving him from execution had been justified. Konev had shown that he was trustworthy. February 1942 brought Konev a new appointment. He was made deputy commander of the Western Front, which was led by Zhukov. Now Konev worked directly under the man who had saved his life. The relationship between the generals was complicated. Zhukov was strong-willed, tough and ruthless towards his subordinates. Konev was also a firm man, but more flexible in his dealings with people. In the winter and spring of 1942, the Western Front fought fierce battles in the Rzhev-Vyazma direction. The Red Army tried to build on the success of the counter-offensive near Moscow and defeat the German forces in the Rzhev-Vyazma area. But the Wehrmacht recovered from the shock, consolidated its positions, and created a powerful defense. Attempts to break through resulted in heavy losses, with minimal results. Escaping execution gave Konev a second wind. He realized that fate had given him a chance that he had to seize. The bitterness of the defeats of the summer and fall of 1941 forced him to rethink his approach to command. Konev became more attentive to intelligence, planned operations more carefully, and devoted more time to training his troops. He learned from his mistakes and adopted the experience of other commanders, especially Zhukov. The Battle of Moscow showed that Konev could win. Under his command, the Kalinin front successfully defended and advanced. The Germans were repelled, and Moscow was saved. This was the first real victory in Konev's military career. It restored his self-confidence and proved his command abilities to the High Command. Zhukov played a huge role in this success. Not only did he save him from execution, but he also gave him the opportunity to redeem himself. How would the relationship between the two commanders develop in the future? In the spring of 1942, Ivan Konev was given independent command. He was appointed commander of the Western Front instead of Zhukov, who was transferred to the High Command. This was a recognition of his growing authority. The Western Front remained the main front in the Soviet-German war, covering the Moscow direction. Konev understood the enormous responsibility. Any mistake here could lead to disaster. The High Command set the Western Front an ambitious task: to defeat the German Rzhev-Vyazma group, liberate Smolensk, and advance westward. The Germans had created a powerful fortified area in the Rzhev region, the so-called Rzhev salient, which protruded into the Soviet defenses. This salient threatened Moscow and tied up significant Red Army forces. In the summer of 1942, Konev launched the first Rzhev-Sychev offensive. The Western Front troops struck the German positions, attempting to break through the defenses and encircle the Rzhev group. The offensive began on July 30. The first days were successful. Soviet troops wedged themselves into the German defenses and advanced several kilometers. But then the offensive stalled. The Germans brought in reserves, launched counterattacks, and cut off the units that had broken through. The fighting became extremely fierce. Both sides suffered enormous losses. The infantry attacked fortified positions under heavy artillery and machine gun fire. Tanks were blown up by mines and burned by anti-tank guns. The Air Force bombed the positions without stopping. By the end of August, it became clear that it would not be possible to break through the German defenses. The losses were monstrous. Tens of thousands killed and wounded. Territorial gains were minimal. A few kilometers, bought with the blood of thousands of soldiers. Konev insisted on stopping the fruitless attacks, but the High Command demanded that the offensive continue. The war was raging across the entire front, and the Western Front had to tie down the enemy's forces. In November 1942, the Second Rzhev-Sychevskaya Operation, codenamed Mars, began. It was a major offensive operation developed by Zhukov and personally supervised by him. Konev commanded the Western Front troops, which delivered the main blow. The operation was planned as a grand encirclement of the German group in the Rzhev area. On November 25th, the troops went on the offensive, but the Germans were ready for the blow. They created a deeply echeloned defense, prepared powerful reserves, and organized a fire system. Soviet troops encountered a wall of fire. Infantry divisions melted away before their eyes. Tank corps suffered huge losses. Attempts to break through were repeatedly drowned in blood. The fighting continued until mid-December, but to no avail. Operation Mars ended in a crushing defeat. Soviet losses exceeded 100,000 killed and wounded. The German defense held. The Rzhev salient remained in enemy hands. For Konev, it was a bitter failure. He had failed to accomplish the task set by the High Command. In February 1943, retribution followed. Konev was removed from his post as commander of the Western Front. Officially, it was called a transfer, but everyone understood that it was a demotion for failure. Instead of commanding the front, Konev was given the post of commander of the Kalinin Front, which was considered a secondary direction. It was a blow to his pride, but not a disaster. Konev remained commander of the front. The difficult lessons of Rzhev became an important stage in Konev's development as a commander. He realized that frontal attacks on fortified defenses led to huge losses and rarely produced results. Maneuvers were needed. Strikes on weak points were needed, and skillful use of tank forces was needed for deep breakthroughs. He would learn these lessons and apply them in future operations. The Battle of Rzhev showed the limits of the Red Army's capabilities in 1942. The army was learning to fight, but had not yet reached the level that would allow it to defeat the enemy with minimal losses. The Wehrmacht remained a formidable opponent, capable of delivering significant counterattacks. Konev understood that the road to victory would be long and bloody, and that not only courage and fortitude were needed, but also military skill. Being relieved of his command of the Western Front was a serious blow to Konev. He understood that his authority in the eyes of the High Command had been shaken. Two major defeats near Rzhev overshadowed his success near Kalinin. Konev found himself in a difficult position. He had to prove his abilities again and regain trust. The Kalinin front offered such an opportunity, but the tasks there were more modest. In the spring of 1943, the situation on the Soviet-German front changed. Stalingrad and the Caucasus were liberated, and the Germans were retreating. Both sides were preparing for a summer offensive. Everyone understood that the summer of 1943 would be decisive. Konev had to prove that his failures at Rzhev did not spell the end of his talent. Ahead lay the Battle of Kursk, which would give him a chance to redeem himself. Would he be able to seize this opportunity? In the summer of 1943, the greatest battle of World War II took place, the Battle of Kursk. The Germans were preparing Operation Citadel, intending to encircle and destroy Soviet troops on the Kursk salient. The Soviet command knew about the enemy's plans and prepared their defenses. In May, Konev was unexpectedly transferred from the Kalinin front to a new position as commander of the Steppe Military District. In July, the Steppe Military District was transformed into the Steppe Front, which became the strategic reserve of the High Command. 5 combined arms armies, a tank corps, 3 tank and 3 mechanized corps, numerous artillery and aviation units, a powerful force ready to enter the battle at the decisive moment. Konev received a powerful tool, but he had to use it according to the instructions of the High Command. On July 5, 1943, the Battle of Kursk began. The Germans struck from the north and south, trying to break through the defenses and surround the Soviet troops. Konev closely monitored developments, ready at any moment to bring his front into battle. The troops of the Central and Voronezh fronts fought with unparalleled courage, repelling the enemy's onslaught. On July 12th, the largest tank battle took place near Prokhorovka. On the same day, the German offensive finally ran out of steam. Soviet troops launched a counter-offensive. Konev's Steppe Front was tasked with building on its success and striking in the direction of Belgorod and Kharkov. The moment had come for the reserves to enter the battle. Konev's troops entered the battle and immediately demonstrated their high caliber. The Steppe Front advanced skillfully and in a well-organized manner, delivering powerful blows to the weakened German units. Konev used tank corps to make deep breakthroughs, not allowing the Germans to gain a foothold at intermediate lines. The Germans retreated, trying to preserve their troops and avoid encirclement. On August 5, 1943, the troops of the Steppe Front liberated Belgorod. On the same day, Orel was liberated by troops from other fronts. In the evening, the first victory salute of the war thundered in Moscow. 12 artillery salvos from 120 guns. It was a symbol of the turning point in the war. The Red Army finally seized the strategic initiative. Konev did not stop there. The troops of the Steppe Front continued their offensive on Kharkov, Ukraine's second-largest city and an important industrial and transport hub. The Germans fortified Kharkov, turning it into a powerful defensive area. They understood the importance of the city and were ready to fight for every street. The battle for Kharkov promised to be difficult. The offensive on Kharkov began in mid-August. The troops of the Steppe Front surrounded the city from the north and east, cutting off the German group's retreat routes. Konev used a tactic that he would use in the future. Not a frontal assault, but maneuvering, encirclement, and strikes on communications. The Germans were faced with a choice: to be surrounded or to leave the city. On August 23, 1943, Kharkov was liberated. It was a crucial victory. Konev proved himself a master of offensive operations. Under his command, the Steppe Front advanced quickly and energetically, inflicting serious damage on the enemy. Losses were significantly lower than in previous operations. Konev learned to fight skillfully, to protect his soldiers, and to achieve results not by numbers, but by skill. For his successful leadership of the troops in the Battle of Kursk, The steppe front was renamed the Second Ukrainian Front on October 20, 1943. This was recognition of his merits. Konev firmly established himself among the leading Soviet military commanders. The Kursk Bulge became his triumph, washing away the shame of the Rzhev failures. He proved that he was capable of defeating a strong enemy. On February 20, 1944, Ivan Konev was awarded the title of Marshal of the Soviet Union. At the age of 46, he became one of the youngest marshals. This was recognition of his outstanding command abilities. From regimental commander to marshal, a journey that took 18 years, the peasant's son had reached the top of the military hierarchy. The Kursk Bulge showed that the Red Army had learned how to fight. The German blitzkrieg no longer worked. Soviet troops knew how to defend themselves, how to attack, and how to crush the enemy. Konev made a significant contribution to this victory. His steppe front performed admirably, liberating Belgorod and Kharkov and inflicting heavy losses on the Germans. Konev's command style differed from Zhukov's. Fewer frontal attacks, more maneuvering. The Battle of Kursk was a turning point not only in the war but also in Konev's career. He was finally rehabilitated after the failures of 1941-1942. The rank of Marshal opened the way to higher command positions. New operations and new victories awaited him. Konev became a master of tank operations, a commander capable of solving the most complex operational tasks. What awaited Marshal Konev on the road to Berlin? In the fall of 1943, Marshal Konev's Second Ukrainian Front faced a daunting task: to cross the Dnieper River and liberate the left bank of Ukraine. The Dnieper was a mighty natural barrier, which the Germans had turned into a powerful defensive line. Hitler called it the Eastern Wall and ordered it to be held at all costs. Crossing the Dnieper required careful preparation and determination. Konev's troops reached the Dnieper at the end of September. The river was several hundred meters wide at this point, with the right bank dominating the left. The Germans had built a system of fortifications, deployed artillery, and mined the approaches. An attempt to cross the river on the move could have ended in disaster, but the High Command demanded that the Germans not be given time to strengthen their defenses. Konev decided to cross the Dnieper on a broad front, in several places at once. This was supposed to disperse the enemy's forces and prevent them from creating a powerful group in one direction. The troops began preparations. They gathered crossing equipment, prepared assault groups, and reconnoitered enemy positions. Time was working against the Soviet troops. Every day the Germans strengthened their defenses. Late September and early October became a time of heroic crossings of the Dnieper. Soviet soldiers forced the river in boats, rafts, and makeshift means under heavy enemy fire. Many died before reaching the shore, but others gained a foothold, created bridgeheads, and repelled counterattacks. The Red Army demonstrated miracles of courage. Troops of the Second Ukrainian Front captured several bridgeheads on the right bank of the Dnieper. The most important was the bridgehead in the Kremenchug area. Konev concentrated his main forces here, preparing for a decisive strike. The Germans understood the danger and counterattacked fiercely, trying to push the Soviet troops back into the Dnieper. The fighting on the bridgehead was extremely fierce. In October, Konev's troops expanded the bridgehead and went on the offensive. The strike was delivered in the direction of Krivoy Rog and Kirovograd. The German defenses were breached. Tank corps rushed into the breach, developing their success in depth. Konev demonstrated his skill in commanding mobile formations. He knew how to bring tanks into the breach at the right moment, directing their strikes at the enemy's most vulnerable points. The liberation of the left bank of Ukraine was in full swing. The troops of the Second Ukrainian Front advanced south and southwest, liberating city after city: Dnipropetrovsk, Dniprodzerzhinsk, Kryvyi Rih. The most important industrial centers returned to Soviet control. The Germans retreated, but in an organized manner, launching counterattacks in an attempt to delay the advance. In November and December 1943, fighting took place for Kirovograd. The city was of great strategic importance, a major railway junction, and a stronghold of German defense. Konev organized an operation to encircle the city. Tank corps surrounded Kirovograd from the flanks, cutting off the German garrison's retreat routes. On January 8, 1944, the city was liberated. The Battle of the Dnieper became one of the largest operations of the war. The Red Army crossed the mighty river, broke through the eastern wall, and liberated vast territories. Konev proved himself to be an outstanding organizer of large-scale offensive operations. His front acted energetically, striking in the style of a blitzkrieg, quickly, decisively, without giving the enemy time to recover. The winter of 1943 to 1944 was spent in continuous fighting. The troops of the Second Ukrainian Front did not stop, continuing their offensive even in harsh weather conditions. Konev gave the enemy no respite, constantly looking for weak spots in their defenses. Such activity exhausted the Germans, preventing them from establishing a stable defense. Konev's successes did not go unnoticed. The High Command highly appreciated the actions of the Second Ukrainian Front. Konev established himself as one of the leading commanders of the Red Army. He was ranked alongside Zhukov, Rokossovsky, and Vatutin. Konev's manner of conducting operations was distinguished by its scale and decisiveness. He was a proponent of deep tank raids, encirclements, and bold maneuvers. The crossing of the Dnieper demonstrated the increased skill of the Red Army and its commanders. What had seemed impossible a year ago was now accomplished with flying colors. Konev mastered the art of modern offensive operations, breaking through defenses, introducing tank masses into the breach, and rapidly developing success. These skills would be useful in future operations. The battle for the Dnieper ended in a complete victory for the Soviet troops. The eastern wall collapsed. Left bank Ukraine was liberated. Konev proved himself a master of large-scale operations. New tasks lay ahead, encircling German groups, liberating right bank Ukraine, and reaching the borders of the USSR. Was Marshal Konev ready for new achievements? January 1944 brought Konev a new grandiose task. The High Command planned to encircle and destroy a large German group in the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky area. 10 Wehrmacht divisions and 1 SS division found themselves trapped in a pocket formed by the advancing Soviet fronts. Konev's Second Ukrainian Front and Vatutin's First Ukrainian Front were to close the encirclement and destroy the enemy. The operation began on January 24. Konev's troops struck from the south, while Vatutin's troops struck from the north. The Germans did not expect such a powerful offensive and did not have time to organize their defenses. Soviet tank corps advanced rapidly, encircling the German group from the flanks. A few days later, the advanced units of both fronts joined forces. The ring was closed. More than 56,000 German soldiers and officers were surrounded. This was a significant force, capable of fighting and attempting a breakthrough. Hitler forbade retreat and ordered them to hold out until relief troops arrived. The German command hastily formed a group to break through the ring from the outside. Konev and Vatutin were to simultaneously tighten the ring around the encircled forces and repel the attacks of the relief forces. February 1944 was a time of fierce fighting. The Germans attacked fiercely from the outside, trying to break through to the encircled forces. SS tank divisions delivered powerful blows, broke through, suffered heavy losses, but continued to advance. Soviet troops heroically held their defenses, repelling attack after attack. Konev personally coordinated the actions of the troops, transferring reserves to threatened areas. At the same time, the encirclement was being eliminated. Soviet artillery methodically shelled the positions of the encircled troops, while the Air Force bombed them around the clock. Infantry and tanks tightened the ring, cutting off one position after another. The Germans resisted desperately, realizing that the alternative was capture or death. Supplies were delivered to the encircled troops by air, but Soviet fighters shot down the transport planes. By mid-February, the situation of the encircled troops had become hopeless. Ammunition was running out, food was running low, and there was nowhere to evacuate the wounded. The relief troops were unable to break through the ring. The Soviet defense held. The command of the encircled group decided to break through. On February 17th, the Germans made a desperate attempt to break out of the cauldron. The breakthrough took place in a snowstorm. The Germans gathered all their forces and struck on a narrow section, trying to break through. Soviet troops met them with heavy fire. A terrible massacre ensued. The Germans pushed forward, abandoning their equipment, the wounded, and their supplies. Many managed to break through, but most were killed or captured. The Korsun-Shevchenko pocket was eliminated. The defeat of the German group near Korsun-Shevchenko became one of the Red Army's brilliant victories. The enemy lost 10 divisions, tens of thousands of soldiers killed and captured, and a huge amount of equipment. Konev proved himself a master of encirclement. A classic operation requiring precise coordination of large forces over a large area. On February 20th, 1944, in the midst of the operation, Ivan Konev was awarded the title of Marshal of the Soviet Union. This was recognition of his outstanding achievements. The Korsun-Shevchenko operation was not yet over, but its success was evident. At the age of 46, Konev became a marshal, reaching the pinnacle of his military career. The operation near Korsun-Shevchenko went down in history as a model of encirclement and destruction of a large enemy group. Konev demonstrated his ability to coordinate actions with the neighboring front, his firmness in repelling deblocking strikes, and his determination in eliminating the encirclement. The Germans suffered a heavy defeat, which weakened their forces in Ukraine. The winter of 1943 to 1944 brought Konev the rank of Marshal and the fame of an outstanding commander. He finally established himself among the best commanders of the Red Army. His name was on a par with those of Zhukov and Rokossovsky. New operations and new victories awaited him. The war was approaching the borders of the Soviet Union. The Korsun-Shevchenko pocket showed that the Red Army had mastered the art of encirclement, the very tactic with which the Germans had crushed the Soviet troops in 1941. Now the situation had changed. Konev had become a master of this art. His tank wedges surrounded German groups, cut off their retreat routes, and created encirclements. Maneuver warfare required precisely such commanders. What awaited Marshal Konev on his way to the western borders? In the spring of 1944, Marshal Konev's Second Ukrainian Front was preparing for a new operation, the Uman-Botoshani offensive. The task was enormous: to break through the German defenses, liberate right bank Ukraine, reach the borders of the USSR, and enter Romanian territory. This meant that the war was approaching its logical conclusion, the liberation of Soviet territory. The Germans had created a powerful defense. After their defeat at Korsun-Shevchenkivsky, they brought in reserves, strengthened their positions, and were ready to fight for every meter of land. Konev planned the operation carefully. He concentrated a powerful strike force, brought in artillery and tanks, and organized cooperation with the Air Force. The offensive was to begin in March. On March 5, 1944, the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front went on the offensive. The strike was delivered with enormous force on a narrow section. The German defenses were broken through on the very first day. Tank corps rushed into the breach, not giving the enemy time to recover. Konev demanded maximum speed of the offensive. It was necessary to prevent the Germans from gaining a foothold at the intermediate lines. A distinctive feature of this operation was the march of tank units across rough terrain. The spring thaw turned the roads into a continuous mess of mud. Tanks got stuck, cars got bogged down, and artillery lagged behind. But Konev made a bold decision. The tank corps would go straight across fields and forests, ignoring the roads. It was a risky move, but it paid off. The tankers showed amazing skill and endurance. They drove their vehicles off-road, across rivers and ravines, through forests and swamps. The equipment broke down and got stuck, but the columns kept moving forward. Konev constantly demanded that the pace be quickened so as not to give the enemy a respite. His motto was simple: forward, forward at any cost. On March 10, the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front liberated Uman, a large city on the right bank of Ukraine. They advanced 100 kilometers in 5 days, an excellent result given the lack of roads. The Germans did not have time to organize their defenses, and their units retreated in disorder, abandoning their equipment and supplies. Konev created a situation close to defeat. By the end of March, Konev's troops had reached the Prut River, the state border of the USSR. It was a historic moment. For the first time since the retreat of 1941, the Red Army had returned to the border. On March 26th, the advanced units of the Second Ukrainian Front crossed the Prut and entered Romanian territory. The war had come to the land of Hitler's ally. Konev's troops were the first to cross the border. It was symbolic. The Marshal, whose armies had been defeated at the beginning of the war, whose fronts had been surrounded, was now the first to leave the USSR. It was revenge for the defeats, proof that setbacks can be overcome, that talent and will are stronger than temporary failures. Entering Romanian territory marked a new stage in the war. Now the fighting was taking place outside the Soviet Union. The task had changed. It was no longer to defend the homeland, but to defeat the enemy on its own territory and liberate Europe from Nazism. Konev understood the historical significance of the moment. His troops were becoming an army of liberation. The Uman-Botishan operation ended in a brilliant victory. The troops of the Second Ukrainian Front advanced 200 to 250 kilometers, liberated vast territories, and inflicted heavy losses on the enemy. Konev once again demonstrated his skill in conducting a deep offensive operation in difficult conditions. The spring of 1944 was a time of triumph for Konev. His front operated in an exemplary manner, solving the most difficult tasks. The march across rough terrain entered the textbooks of military art as an example of determination and unconventional thinking. Konev proved that a true commander does not stop at difficulties, but finds a way to overcome them. Reaching the border of the USSR and crossing it were important milestones in the war. Konev could be proud. His troops were the first to reach this line. Ahead lay battles in Romania, the liberation of the Balkans, and the advance to the heart of the Third Reich. The war was coming to an end, but the hardest battles were still ahead. How would Marshal Konev behave in the final stage of the war? In May 1944, an event occurred that changed the fate of Ivan Konev. He was appointed commander of the First Ukrainian Front, replacing General Vatutin, who had been fatally wounded in a car accident. The First Ukrainian Front was one of the strongest on the Soviet-German front, and was to participate in decisive operations to liberate Ukraine and Poland. The appointment to the First Ukrainian Front was a recognition of Konev's outstanding achievements. The High Command entrusted him with one of the key sections of the front. Now Konev commanded a huge group of forces, several armies, powerful tank units, numerous artillery and aviation units. It was a tool capable of solving strategic tasks, and such tasks were not long in coming. In the summer of 1944, the Red Army was preparing a grand offensive in Belarus, Operation Bagration. At the same time, an offensive was planned in Ukraine, the Lviv-Sandomierets offensive. Konev's First Ukrainian Front was tasked with breaking through the defenses of the German Army Group North Ukraine, liberating Lviv, crossing the Vistula River, and capturing a bridgehead on its western bank. On July 13, 1944, the offensive began. Konev's troops delivered a powerful blow to German positions. The defenses were broken through on a wide front. Rybalko and Lelyushenko's tank armies rushed into the breach, developing their success with unprecedented speed. The Germans could not withstand the onslaught and began to retreat. Konev created a situation of operational breakthrough. The pace of the offensive was dizzying. Soviet tanks covered 30 to 40 kilometers a day, not allowing the enemy to gain a foothold. Konev demanded maximum determination from the army commanders. His orders were brief and clear. Break through the defenses, bypass pockets of resistance, and rush deep into enemy territory. The Germans were losing control of their troops. On July 27, troops of the First Ukrainian Front liberated Lviv, an ancient Ukrainian city and the largest center in western Ukraine. The liberation of Lviv was greeted with jubilation. The city's population had endured 3 years of occupation, and the return of the Red Army meant the end of the nightmare. Konev personally rode into the liberated city, but there was no time to stop. Ahead lay the Vistula, the last major water barrier before Germany. Konev set the task of forcing the Vistula on the move and capturing a bridgehead on the western bank. It was a daring task, but Konev believed in his troops. The tank armies rushed towards the Vistula, outpacing the retreating Germans. In early August, the advanced units of the First Ukrainian Front reached the Vistula in the Sandomierets area. The Germans did not have time to organize their defenses on the river. Soviet troops crossed the Vistula on the move and captured a bridgehead on the western bank. The Sandomierets bridgehead became one of the most important achievements of the summer campaign of 1944. From here, the decisive offensive on Berlin would begin. The Germans understood the danger of the Sandomierets bridgehead and made desperate attempts to eliminate it. They launched counterattacks with tank divisions, unleashed a barrage of artillery fire on the bridgehead, and attacked from the air. But the Soviet troops held their ground. Konev constantly reinforced the group on the bridgehead, transferred reserves, and strengthened the defenses. The battles for the Sandomierets bridgehead continued until October. The Germans were unable to push the Soviet troops back across the Vistula. The bridgehead was held and expanded. Konev demonstrated not only his ability to attack, but also his ability to organize a sustainable defense. He did not give up an inch of the captured land. The Sandomierets bridgehead became a springboard for future offensives. On July 29, 1944, Ivan Konev was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. It was the country's highest award. Konev received it for his brilliant conduct of the Lviv-Sandomierets offensive. The Gold Star was recognition of his talent as a commander. Marshal Konev finally established himself as one of the greatest military leaders of the war. The summer of 1944 was a time of great triumphs for the Red Army. Operation Bagration defeated the German Army Group Center. Konev's Lviv-Sandomierets offensive defeated Army Group North Ukraine. The Wehrmacht suffered one disaster after another. Konev was one of the main architects of these victories. His military artistry reached its peak. The First Ukrainian Front under Konev's command became the striking force of the Red Army. It was this front that was to play a decisive role in the final operations of the war. Konev prepared his troops for the final push on Berlin. Germany lay ahead, and the way there led through the Sandomierets bridgehead. How would Marshal Konev behave in the battle for the heart of the Third Reich? The winter of 1944-1945 was spent preparing for the decisive offensive. The High Command planned a grandiose operation, Vistula-Oder, which was to bring the Red Army to the borders of Germany. Konev's First Ukrainian Front was assigned a key role. The offensive was to begin from the Sandomierets bridgehead. Konev carefully prepared the operation. Troops, ammunition, fuel, and food were secretly transferred to the bridgehead. Tank armies, artillery, and aviation were concentrated there. The Germans knew that an offensive was inevitable, but they did not know when and where the main strike would be delivered. Konev organized a grandiose operation to misinform the enemy. On January 12, 1945, at 5 o'clock in the morning, artillery preparation began. Thousands of guns unleashed a barrage of fire on German positions. The earth shook from the explosions. The German defenses were methodically suppressed, section by section. The artillery barrage lasted more than an hour. Then the infantry went on the attack. The German defenses were breached on the first day.
Konev brought in the tank armies of Rybalko and Lelushenko.
Thousands of tanks rushed forward, crushing the remnants of the enemy's defenses. The pace of the offensive was incredible. Tank columns covered 50 to 70 kilometers a day. The Wehrmacht could not stop this steel torrent. The German defenses were collapsing. Konev's troops liberated city after city: Kielce, Częstochowa, Radom. The Polish population welcomed the Soviet soldiers as liberators. Konev demanded that his troops treat the civilian population humanely. He understood that the Red Army was now perceived as an army of liberation and needed to live up to that image. The liberation of Krakow, the ancient capital of Poland, was a particular achievement. On January 17, 1945, Konev's troops liberated Krakow, the ancient capital of Poland and a city of historical monuments. The Germans did not have time to destroy the city, leaving it almost intact. The Polish population enthusiastically welcomed the liberators. Konev gave the strictest order to protect cultural monuments and prevent looting. Krakow was saved thanks to the speed of the offensive. The troops of the First Ukrainian Front continued their advance. They crossed Poland in 2 weeks and entered Silesia, Germany's most important industrial region. The Germans tried to blow up factories and mines, but they did not have time. Soviet tanks were faster. Silesia, with its coal mines and metallurgical plants, remained almost intact. It was a huge trophy. By the end of January, the advanced units of the First Ukrainian Front had reached the Oder River, the last major water barrier before Berlin. Only 60 kilometers remained between the Oder and the German capital. Konev ordered his troops to force the river on the move and capture bridgeheads on the western bank. The tankers crossed the ice and captured several bridgeheads. Berlin was within reach. In 23 days of offensive, Konev's troops advanced 500 kilometers. It was one of the most rapid operations of World War II. The German Army Group A was defeated, losing most of its troops, equipment, and supplies. The road to Berlin was open. It seemed that one more push would bring Soviet troops to the German capital. But then, the order to stop came. The High Command ordered them to consolidate their positions, bring up reinforcements, and gather strength for the final blow. The Germans gained a month's respite and used it to strengthen Berlin's defenses. Konev was disappointed. He wanted to take Berlin on the march, without giving the enemy time to organize. But an order is an order. The troops went on the defensive and began preparations for the assault on Berlin. The Vistula-Oder offensive was a triumph of Konev's military genius. He brilliantly planned the breakthrough, made good use of his tank armies, maintained a rapid pace of advance, and did not allow the enemy to consolidate its positions. It was an operation worthy of the best examples of military art. Konev proved that he was a master of deep offensive operations. The troops of the First Ukrainian Front demonstrated the highest combat capability. Tankers Rybalko and Lelushenko acted boldly and decisively. The infantry kept pace with the tanks, securing the captured lines. The artillery suppressed enemy resistance. The Air Force dominated the skies. The interaction between all branches of the military was exemplary. Konev created a perfectly coordinated military machine. Reaching the Oder meant that the war had entered its final phase. The Red Army stood at the borders of the Reich, ready to deliver the final blow. The Germans were still resisting, but their fate was sealed. Konev and his troops had traveled from the forests of Vologda to the Oder, from a peasant village to the gates of Berlin. The last step remained, the capture of the German capital. February and March 1945 were spent preparing for the decisive assault. Konev oversaw the fortification of bridgeheads, the accumulation of troops, and reconnaissance of enemy defenses. He understood that the fighting for Berlin would be fierce. The Germans would defend their capital to the death. Thorough preparation, overwhelming superiority in forces, and flawless organization were needed. Konev was preparing for the main battle of his life. The Vistula-Oder offensive opened the road to Berlin.
Konev was 60 kilometers from the goal of the entire war.
He dreamed of being the first to enter the German capital and hoist the victory banner over the Reichstag. But there was another contender, Marshal Zhukov, commander of the First Belarusian Front. A silent competition began between the two commanders. Who would be the first to take Berlin? On April 16, 1945, the Berlin operation began. Zhukov launched an offensive from the Zilo Heights, attacking the German defenses head-on. Konev was to begin his offensive a day later, striking south of Berlin. A demarcation line was drawn between the fronts, ending 60 kilometers from Berlin. This meant that both fronts had the right to storm the capital. The race for Berlin began. Zhukov encountered fierce resistance on the Zilo Heights. The Germans had created a powerful defensive line there. The attacks faltered, and the losses were enormous. The offensive stalled. Zhukov brought in more and more forces, but the heights held. Stalin was dissatisfied with the slow progress. At this time, Konev achieved significant success in his sector. Konev launched his offensive on the morning of April 16. His troops broke through the enemy's defenses and advanced rapidly. Rybalko and Lelyushenko's tank armies bypassed the German positions, moved into the rear, and created the threat of encirclement. The Germans began to retreat. The pace of Konev's offensive was significantly higher than that of Zhukov. By the evening of April 17th, Konev's troops had advanced 30 kilometers. On the evening of April 17th, Stalin called Konev. The Supreme Commander asked how things were going. Konev reported on his successes. Then Stalin said, "Things are going badly for Zhukov. Turn Rybalko and Lelyushenko's tank armies towards Berlin from the south." It was the long-awaited order. Konev received permission to storm Berlin. A real race between the two fronts to the German capital began. Konev immediately ordered the tank armies to turn north towards Berlin. The tank crews rushed forward at maximum speed. Every kilometer counted. They had to get ahead of Zhukov and be the first to break into the city. The Germans tried to delay the advance, but they could not stop the Soviet tank avalanches. Rybalko and Lelyushenko acted with incredible energy. On April 18th, Zhukov finally broke through the defenses at the Zalo Heights and began to advance towards Berlin. But Konev was closer. His tank armies were bypassing Berlin from the south, striving to be the first to break into the city. On April 20, the advanced units of Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army reached the southern outskirts of Berlin. Konev was on the verge of triumph. But Zhukov was also approaching Berlin from the east and north. On April 21, his troops broke into the eastern districts of the city. A competition began within Berlin itself. Who would be the first to reach the center? Who would take the Reichstag? Stalin put an end to the rivalry by establishing a new demarcation line between the fronts, according to which the center of Berlin and the Reichstag were assigned to Zhukov's First Belarusian Front. Konev was deeply disappointed. He had come so close to his goal, but at the last moment it was taken away from him. The center of Berlin and the honor of hoisting the victory banner over the Reichstag went to Zhukov. Konev understood that this was a political decision. Zhukov was Stalin's favorite, the chief commander of the war. But the resentment remained. Konev would remember this injustice for the rest of his life. Konev's troops stormed the southern districts of Berlin. The fighting was fierce. The Germans defended themselves fanatically, turning every house into a fortress. Soviet troops paved the way with artillery, tanks, and flamethrowers. The city burned and was destroyed, but the resistance continued. Rybalko and Lelyushenko's tank armies fought their way to the center, but were stopped by a new demarcation line. On April 25th, Konev and Zhukov's troops joined forces in the center of Berlin, completing the encirclement of the city. The German garrison was trapped, with no way out. The final, bloodiest battles began. The Germans knew they had lost, but continued to fight. On April 30th, Soviet troops stormed the Reichstag. On May 2, the Berlin garrison surrendered. the war in Europe was over. The race for Berlin became a dramatic page in the relationship between Konev and Zhukov. Both commanders sought the same goal. Both wanted the glory of capturing the German capital. Zhukov won this competition, but the victory came at a high price. The losses of the First Belarusian Front were higher than those of Konev. Konev acted more skillfully, but fate decided otherwise. The rivalry between the two marshals determined the outcome of the war in Europe. Their race spurred the pace of the offensive and hastened the fall of Berlin. The Germans found themselves between two powerful blows and could not withstand them. The capital of the Reich fell, and Germany surrendered. Konev made a huge contribution to this victory, although he did not receive the credit. Is this fair? Konev's tank armies played a decisive role in the encirclement and capture of Berlin, even though Zhukov stormed the city center. Rybalko's 3rd Guards tank army broke into the southern districts of Berlin on April 20th. The tankers acted with incredible audacity, breaking through the German defenses. Lelushenko's 4th Guards tank army bypassed Berlin from the southwest, cutting off the German troops' retreat routes. Rybalko and Lelushenko were Konev's favorite commanders. They understood him perfectly, acted proactively and decisively. Konev entrusted them with the most difficult tasks, and they never let him down. In the battles for Berlin, these two commanders demonstrated the highest level of tank warfare skill. Their armies acted like a sharp sword, cutting through the enemy's defenses. The fighting in the southern districts of Berlin was fierce. The Germans had turned the city into a fortress. Every house was a fortification, every street a line of defense. Faust Patronen knocked out tanks at close range. Snipers fired from windows and basements. Soviet troops suffered heavy losses, but advanced relentlessly. Direct fire artillery destroyed houses, and tanks cleared the way for the infantry. On April 24, Rybalko's tanks reached the southern edge of Tiergarten, Berlin's Central Park. They were 3 kilometers from the Reichstag. Konev ordered the offensive to continue toward the city center, but at that moment, an order came from headquarters to establish a new demarcation line. Rybalko's tankers were forced to stop just a few kilometers short of their goal. Konev focused his main efforts on encircling Berlin from the west. His troops were to prevent the German garrison from breaking out, create an outer encirclement front, and repel any attempts to break the blockade. The task was brilliantly accomplished. The ring around Berlin closed, and the German garrison was trapped. Konev and Zhukov's troops joined forces, cutting the enemy's defenses into pieces. At the same time, the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front crushed the German Army Group Center, which was trying to break through to Berlin. Konev organized a powerful defense on the outer front of the encirclement. German tank divisions repeatedly attacked Soviet positions, trying to break through to the capital. All attacks were repelled with heavy losses for the enemy. By the end of April, resistance in Berlin began to weaken. The Germans' ammunition supplies were running out. There was no food, and the wounded were dying without medical care. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide. On May 1st, the new German government began negotiations on surrender. On May 2nd, the Berlin garrison ceased resistance. The capital of the Third Reich fell. The Berlin triumph was the pinnacle of Konev's military glory, although it was overshadowed by the fact that Zhukov took the city center. But Konev's contribution to the victory was enormous. His troops surrounded Berlin from the south and west, cut off the retreat routes, and defeated the unblocking groups. Without the actions of the 1st Ukrainian Front, the capture of Berlin would have been impossible, or would have cost much more. The tank breakthrough by Rybalko and Lelushenko's armies went down in military history as a model of a rapid offensive. The tankers advanced from the Oder to Berlin in 4 days, overcoming fierce enemy resistance. It was a brilliant maneuver, worthy of the best pages of military history. Konev, as a commander, reached the pinnacle of his skill. The fall of Berlin meant the end of Germany. On May 8, 1945, the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Germany was signed in Karlshorst. Marshal Zhukov signed the document on behalf of the Soviet Union. Konev was not present at the ceremony, another insult. But the war was over, and that was the main thing. Millions of lives were saved, fascism was defeated, and Europe was liberated. The Berlin operation ended in complete victory. Germany surrendered, and Hitler's Reich ceased to exist. Konev and his troops marched from Vologda to Berlin, rising from private to Marshal of the Soviet Union. The journey was full of trials, defeats, and victories. But the finale was triumphant. However, there was still one more operation to be carried out, which would be the final chord of the war. What was it? The war in Europe was over, but Konev's troops did not get a respite. On May 6, 1945, an anti-fascist uprising broke out in Prague. The Czechs took up arms, trying to liberate their capital before the arrival of the Allies. The German garrison suppressed the uprising with brutality. Fighting raged throughout the city, and civilians were dying. The Czechs turned to the Red Army for help. Konev received an order to immediately come to the aid of rebellious Prague. The troops of the First Ukrainian Front were located 150 to 200 kilometers from Prague. Between them and the Czech capital stood units of the German Army Group Center. Almost 1 million soldiers who had not yet laid down their arms. It was necessary to break through the defenses, defeat the enemy, and reach Prague with a swift advance. There was almost no time. Every hour of delay cost the lives of the rebellious Czechs. Konev organized the offensive with maximum speed. The tank armies of Rybalko and Lelushenko again became the striking force. On the morning of May 7, they moved on Prague. The Germans tried to hold back the offensive, but the Soviet tankers swept away everything in their path. They were moving at 50 to 60 kilometers a day. The tanks went day and night without stopping to rest. The route lay through the mountains. The Czech mountains, with their narrow roads, steep passes, and dense forests, created additional difficulties. But the tankers overcame all obstacles. They bypassed roadblocks, built new roads, and stormed mountain passes. The Germans blew up bridges, but Soviet sappers built new crossings. Nothing could stop this rapid advance. At 3 o'clock in the morning on May 9, 1945, Rybalko's advanced tanks broke into Prague. The city rejoiced. The Czechs greeted their liberators with incredible enthusiasm. Flowers, hugs, tears of joy. After 6 years of occupation, the capital of Czechoslovakia was free. Soviet tankers crushed the last pockets of resistance and liberated the areas of the city captured by the Germans. The Prague uprising had won. On the morning of May 9, Marshal Konev arrived in Prague. He reviewed the Liberators' parade in the central square. Thousands of Prague residents gathered to see the commander liberator. Konev addressed the townspeople, congratulated them on their liberation, and assured them of the eternal friendship between the Soviet and Czech peoples. It was a moment of triumph, unclouded by any resentment. Prague became Konev's personal victory. After the liberation of Prague, the troops of the First Ukrainian Front completed the defeat of Army Group Center. Upon learning of Germany's surrender, German troops began to surrender en masse. By May 11, almost the entire group had been captured, about 800,000 soldiers and officers. This was the last major encirclement of the war. The Prague operation ended in complete victory. On May 11, 1945, the war in Europe finally ended. The last shots were fired in Czechoslovakia. Konev and his troops put the final end to the Great Patriotic War. From the first battles of the summer of 1941 to the last shots fired in May 1945, there were 4 years of war and 1,418 days of bloody battles. The Prague operation was Marshal Konev's last triumph in the Great Patriotic War. The rapid advance on Prague, the liberation of the rebellious city, the jubilation of the Czechs. All this was a worthy conclusion to his military career. If Berlin belonged to Zhukov, then Prague became Konev's city. Czechoslovakia will never forget its liberator. The The journey from the forests of Vologda to Prague took almost 50 years. The peasant's son walked this path with honor.
2 world wars, a civil war, hundreds of battles, defeats, and victories. All this tempered his character and forged him into a commander. Konev became one of the greatest military leaders of World War II, a master of tank operations and the liberator of Europe. The end of the war in Europe brought Konev well-deserved fame. He received many awards, orders, medals, foreign awards. Czechoslovakia awarded him the country's highest orders and made him an honorary citizen of Prague. Konev went down in history as the liberator of Prague. This name will be remembered by the grateful Czech people. On May 8th, at 23:01, the war ended. May 9th became Victory Day, a great holiday for all the peoples who defeated fascism. Marshal Konev met this day in liberated Prague, surrounded by jubilant Czechs. It was a fitting end to a great journey. The commander, sent by God, fulfilled his duty to his homeland, to his people, and to history. The war ended in victory,